And on the topic of nurturing and guiding your children, one of the most important things about the guidance I received from my father was that in addition to the sort of training and development he helped to curate for me to help develop certain abilities and skills early on, was the constant conversations we had about things I was learning, about the many questions I started asking at that age about, God, reality, what's our purpose, etc. I think if I tried undergoing the transformation alone, it wouldn't have been as effective as having a more matured adult who I could hold intellectually stimulating conversations with. Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about what parents can do to help raise academically gifted children. So this video is particularly for parents or guardians, but it's also for any young person out there. If you're really serious about pursuing big things and you want to get the right guidance from your parents or guardians, there are a few tips in this video that I'm going to share that you can take to your parents or guardians to help educate them about how to best support you. So it's very beneficial for both parents and guardians, but also for kids and young people as well, looking for specific type of guidance and support from their parents. So, I often have this experience where when parents look at me, they're so impressed with the things I'm able to do and what I've been able to accomplish. And I've come to find that there are often three thoughts that typically run through a parent's mind when they look at me. The first thought is of great awe and admiration, like, really, how is it that Crystal's able to do the stuff that she does? The second thought is, I wish my child could be like Crystal. And then there's a third subsequent thought which follows the second one, which is that although I wish my child could be like Crystal, I don't think it's possible. And parents immediately have this assumption that, I'm able to perform at the level that I do simply because I was just born this way, that I have some sort of natural gene or natural talent that enables me to succeed at this level. But that's a very false assumption that unfortunately is common across many parents. They come across my story or the story of other successful young people. And I'm here to tell parents that nothing could be further from the truth. You see, although yes, I was always a good student academically, I performed very well and I was able to skip multiple grades. And by the age of 12, I was already in grade 8. So by the end of middle school, I was around classmates who were 2, 3, 4 years older than me. So I was around 12 at the time and they would be around 15, 16. So in that age group, a few years is a big difference, because by the age of 15, 16, my classmates in that age group were already thinking about stuff that I wasn't thinking about, things like relationships and sex, etc. So it was a big age difference at that age. And so I grew up going through school sort of in that kind of environment where I was always the youngest, the smallest, surrounded by kids much older than me. But, I had a very important setback, looking back in hindsight, that happened over the course of 2 years, where I went to stay with my mother and her family after my parents separated. I was around 10 at the time. And those 2 years that I spent with my mother and her family were the most detrimental to my performance academically and to my normal development as a child. And I went from being a very good, accomplished student to being one of the low performers in my middle school. And if you ask my friends, then they would tell you that I was a very different student and individual back then. But luckily, 2 weeks prior to my grade 8 exam, I moved over to stay with my father. And within 2 weeks, I was just able to cram as much as possible into my head in order to just make sure that I don't fail. So the focus at the time was just to make sure that I scraped through my exam. So I got passes and upper passes. That was the minimal I had to do. But when grade 9 came around the following year, now suddenly things changed for me for the worse, unfortunately. Because when high school started, now I was around kids who had come from all these other international and private schools, kids who had excellent backgrounds, kids who were way smarter than me academically and just performed at a totally different level. So I went from being not so good in school at a very small middle school to now going into high school and being in a new environment with so many kids from different backgrounds. And so it's kind of like the same experience university students have when they go to college or when they go to university. Suddenly, you're not the most smartest person in your high school or secondary school, because now you're amongst other smart students who've also made it to university. So that environment really wasn't a great thing to happen for me, because it only solidified the identity I had built up over those previous 2 years, that I really wasn't a good student and that schooling wasn't just something that was cut out for me. So seeing students who were better off than I was academically, when you're in such environments like that and when you're a young person, you start to compare yourself with people. And when you don't fare well with your peers, you start to develop low self-esteem. And that's pretty much what happened to me during that period. I just ended up getting to the worst place, where I remember having this very vivid thought and conviction that I was the dumbest kid in school. And math was a subject that I performed particularly poor at. And I hated it so much because no matter how hard I tried to study to get good grades, it just didn't work out. Like, it just wasn't enough. So I ended up developing the identity that maybe I'm just horrible at math, I'm not good at it, and that schooling isn't cut out for someone like me. It's more for those kids out there who are performing so well because it comes naturally to them. So I started developing all this false notions, those false identities, to justify why I wasn't performing well in school. But the real change happened for me when I decided to take a gap year back in 2013. And that year was the beginning of when everything changed for me for the better. And actually, to be honest, before I took the gap year, I was able to sort of settle down by the second semester of grade 9. And my grades started improving. That despite not getting most improved prizes across several subjects, I was able to go like from the bottom of the class up to like the top 5 positions. And that performance, the results I was able to achieve by just focusing for the second semester, really showed me that I could actually do it. And it was a real boosted motivation in my self-esteem, reminding me that if I just put my mind to one thing and I focus and I removed all distractions in my life, I could actually do it. I could actually improve my grades and become a good student. So that good performance in the second semester of grade 9 sort of gave me the impetus or the motivation and also the direction to say that this is something I need to focus on. And perhaps I would be better off taking a full year off just to focus on getting my mind back to where it was supposed to be. And the fortunate thing is, having a parent like my father, he was able to identify what was necessary at that time. And he knew that I had gone through a very rough period over those 2 years living with my mother. And I needed a period to just sort of ground my mind and go back to the basics and just start from scratch and come out with a new mindset so that I could focus on doing well at the end of high school and then into secondary school. So by the end of that gap year in 2013, I had undergone a transformation like nothing I'd ever experienced. And I went from a struggling student with very low self-esteem to a well-grounded, matured, and focused individual. And by the beginning of 2014, I set a goal that I would graduate as a dux of grade 10. And with the right focus and the right habits that I built and the right mindset that I acquired through that transformation during that gap year, that reality was able to come true. And the surprising thing I found is that not only did I graduate as a dux, but math was a subject that I interestingly ended up being the highest performer in. And it went from a subject that I hated just 3 years ago to a subject that I absolutely loved, and a subject that really consumed my days during that period. And my habits towards my studying and my school was very different at that time after that transformation. I became the kind of student that studied my subjects like maths way in advance of others. And I would finish like the entire grade curriculum in just 4 months or 6 months, and then just cruise through the rest of it. And I hardly ever remember like having to study or cram things. So the experience was totally different from my experience in grades 8 and 9, where I was really struggling. And by the end of each semester, like we would have exams. And I have a vivid memory of one of my most like impressive times performing well in school. And that was when we had our end of semester in grade 10, and our maths exam was like out of 100. And I remember getting my maths paper back and I got 100 out of 100. And my classmates came and pulled it out of my hand, and they kind of paraded it around the classroom and said, "Oh, look, Crystal the Brainiac got 100, no mistakes." And I remember taking it to my aunt back home and saying, "Hey, look, I got 100. So my transformation with how I went from hating math to completely loving it was quite interesting during that year. And I also, because I was very passionate about the subject and about my schooling in general, I went ahead and I studied math concepts that were way ahead from what we were learning in grade 10, which meant that in a few cases I knew a lot more than what my math teacher knew. So I knew sort of when I could go to my math teacher for help and when I couldn't go to, because I knew that he definitely won't know what I'm talking about and won't have the answers to it. And of course, that performance slowly started to build a reputation around school. And so I would have students in year 11 and 12 who would come to me for help, and I would be assisting, tutoring them. So having said all of that, I wanted to provide a background and a backstory to the lessons I want to share out of that experience on how parents can help to shape and nurture their children to be academically performant kids in school. So having told that story, my experience shows that you can take a struggling student who is underperforming in school and who thinks that they're not cut out for it to transform them into a thriving high achiever in school. You just need to ensure that they're in the right environment and ensure that they're getting the guidance that they need to help bring out the genius that's within them, because it's in there, trust me, it's in there in every child. And that's a gift that people like my father had, is that it can take a child who's sort of struggling and going nowhere and has no clue what to do with their life and turn them into someone with so much potential who people look at, years down later on and are so impressed with what they're able to do. So how do you actually take a struggling child who's underperforming in school, and how do you transform them into a high achiever who's getting good grades and, most importantly, has established a foundation in their thinking, their mindset, that enables them to thrive both academically but in any other pursuit they choose to follow? So there are 3 factors I want to share, or 3 things that every parent or guardian should keep in mind when making the decision on how to properly raise and nurture their children. The first and most important is the child's age. A child's brain develops in stages throughout life, and there are certain periods that are very ripe for transforming a child. I can honestly tell you that if I tried taking a gap year off at 18 or in my early 20s, I don't think it would have worked out and would have been as effective as doing it at 14. Because by those later stages of development, I would have hardwired a lot of things that would just make the process a lot more difficult. I mean, this is why adults are not as malleable to changes as children are. But when you take a child who's just entered puberty, between the ages of 13, 14, and 15. Those are the perfect years to set the right foundation for them, so that by the time they're in their mid to late teens, they're soaring, and when they get to their 20s, they're way ahead of their peers in terms of what they're doing, what they're accomplishing. So age is very critical. The second factor for parents to be aware of is the environment. And when I say environment, I mean the physical location in which the child is being raised in, the things that the child is constantly surrounded by, and most importantly, the relationships and social circle the child maintains or is exposed to. This is important because the environment and the influences around a child have the most impact in molding them. Because looking at my story, if I had remained with my mother and her family, I don't think my transformation would have been possible, because the environment there wasn't conducive to the kind of growth and development for a child that I needed to have at that time. Because living with my mother would mean being surrounded by alcoholics and abuse and neglect, and most important of all, a lack of love and care. And any parent will know this, as well as any child who's grown up in a home without love, that a children's growth and well-being is determined by how loved and cared they are. Children who grow up starved of love and affection end up with big problems later on in life, and so many insecurities and low self-esteem. So I was lucky that the universe aligned the chips at the right time for me to move away to stay with my father before my graded exam and right before I started high school. So my story would be very different, honestly, if I didn't make that move, if I didn't go from living with my mother to now putting myself in a new environment. Now, part of why the gap year was so effective for me was that I completely isolated myself. And my father had the wisdom and foresight, fortunately, to encourage me to cut out all my old friendships and relationships and to quit social media, so that I didn't have any of those external influences still affecting my life and shaping me in the wrong way. And for a lot of parents now, I know that social media and peer pressure is a big concern for you, because you see your child changing in front of you into a person that you don't think they should be. And all of this is happening right in front of you. And it's not because of you. It's because of the people that are influencing your kids outside of your home. and getting them to do things that they're not supposed to do and things you would never think that they would do. So environment and the relationships that are around your children is very, very important, very critical, because you can try to teach them to be a certain way, but if majority of their time is spent in school and around their friends, they're going to be more influenced by the people they spend the most time with, you. And the third most important factor to keep in mind for parents when thinking about raising your child the right way and guiding them to be academically performant kids is that constant guidance and nurturing is required. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions or underappreciated things that I see in a lot of parents and guardians. You see, children are children. They come into this world completely innocent and on a clean slate. There's no prior programming, there's no past baggages, no predefined outlook of the world. None of the things that adults acquire over years. So children really come into this world with a mind and spirit that's open like a sponge, waiting to absorb everything around them that they come into contact with, both consciously and unconsciously. Yet parents don't understand this, and they think that somehow their children are supposed to magically figure out things and determine what's right from wrong and just know what to do. So most kids are sadly left to their own devices. And there's a pattern you'll often see across households is that many parents just do the list. They make sure that there's a roof over their children's head, that there's food on their table, that they pay for their kids' school fee so that someone else can bother about educating them. They buy them a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer, and a TV so that their kids can get entertained without bothering them. And I know it's a blunt way of putting it, but that's the reality. And until we learn to have difficult but important conversations like this, nothing is going to change. And we're going to have more kids coming into this world without ever fulfilling their potential. And this is why a lot of parents, sort of look at someone like me and they scratch their head and they wonder, why is Crystal so different than my children? Like, what's the secret here? And there really is no secret. All of it boils down to common sense. So the biggest misconception that many parents have when they look at my story is that I just magically somehow ended up this way. That my parents, particularly my father in this case, didn't have to do anything to help me get to where I am today. And I'm here to tell you that that is total BS. Behind the scenes, the stuff that people don't see is 2 decades of my father hungrily and painstakingly searching for the right tools, materials, programs, courses, supplements, you name it, on how to help give me an advantage in life. Now, there's a disclaimer here that I want to make because it's important. My father didn't do the absolute best he could to help me succeed. And that's a regret that we both have whenever we have our conversations. And there are many things that cause friction between my relationship with my father that he didn't prioritize or do enough of when it comes to guiding me and nurturing me the right way. But he's lucky that I'm a different spirit, because whatever little guidance he gave me during those important periods that I needed support, I took it and I ran with it and I made it my own. And I was also very hungry to build a better life for myself and to not be tied down by my past and the things I hated about my upbringing that caused me to work even harder. Because the thing is, both my father and I can acknowledge today that if he had solely focused on raising me and not on trying to do so many other things like, managing another relationship that took his time away from spending more on helping to guide me, I would be light years away from where I am today. In fact, I'm 26 now. I'd likely have already graduated with my master's or my PhD. That's the truth, because that's the trajectory that I was on, like by 15. But everything happens for a reason, I believe that. And although we can't change the past, we can use our mistakes as stepping stones for growth, as learnings. And my hope is that I can share some of the shortcomings that my father had when he came to raising me, and that mistakes I also made when trying to focus on, pursuing what I wanted to do, so that parents out there, young people, can look at our mistakes and say, let's not do this. We can do better. But having said that, there's a silver lining here for parents. And it means that if you're a parent or a guardian out there, a little bit of commitment from you can make a big difference for your child in the long term. It really can. So although we regret that my father didn't spend enough time guiding me, the little that he did make a big difference to me and has helped to lead me to where I am today. And on the topic of nurturing and guiding your children, one of the most important things about the guidance I received from my father was that in addition to the sort of training and development he helped to curate for me to help develop certain abilities and skills early on, was the constant conversations we had about things I was learning, about the many questions I started asking at that age about, God, reality, what's our purpose, etc. I think if I tried undergoing the transformation alone, it wouldn't have been as effective as having a more matured adult who I could hold intellectually stimulating conversations with. My father really enjoyed that too, because he would often tell me that talking to me was the only time he felt he was himself, and he could get away from, a lot of the toxicity he was going through in his relationships. So we always had a ritual of like having dinner at around 7-8 p.m. and then we would talk from 9 p.m. all the way to 1 or 2 a.m. And I got a lot of practice as well in terms of building up my communication and collaboration skills by way of having regular conversations with my father. So in many ways, the apple really doesn't fall far from the tree, truly. I am who I am today because I got, the same character, the same mindset, the same outlook on life, because I was raised from a parent who thinks that way. But I found through observation that we have a lot of incredibly smart and well-accomplished parents out there today, but their children are unfortunately nothing like them. They're a completely different breed altogether. And it goes back to factor 2 I talked about, which is the environment and the social circle that your children are exposed to. While the parents are succeeding professionally, the children are being left to their own devices with no oversight, and external forces are influencing them in the wrong way and slowly shaping them into unrecognizable individuals. So I hope this video brought light to a pretty common but false assumption that certain kids are just naturally gifted and that your child doesn't have what it takes to succeed in life. As always, I welcome any thoughts, feedback, or questions you have on the topic, and comment below if you're a parent or guardian, which factor surprised you the most, or really anything I touched in the video that resonated with you or taught you something you didn't know before. If you found this video helpful, as always, please do like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share this with as many people as possible that could benefit from hearing this. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.